Okay, we got the case
Oh
in.
my god.
He's doing it. I hit people, I hit 3 people.
Hey guys, boy do I have a surprise for you today. You may have already heard that I and a number of other creators have been invited to Riot's recent Arcane Summit that happened about a week or two ago. Please forgive me, I failed to delete Yona. And among many other things we had the pleasure of witnessing early in the works, everyone was also given the opportunity to play test Ambessa, which they graciously gave us the footage to show you guys. This will also be, I believe, the first time you get to see my face on video, so you can stop asking for a face reveal even though I've already shown my face a bunch of times, but I digress. In commemoration of Arcane Season 2 being released in late 2024 and much earlier this year, it was confirmed that Ambessa would become playable as a champion in League of Legends. She'll be scheduled for release in version 14.22 I believe, if not 14.22 then 14.23 for sure. Having been allowed to actually play the champ firsthand this time around instead of formulating opinions on ability descriptions alone, this will arguably be my most exciting episode to talk about because I also got to speak to the designer who made Ambessa and hear his thought process. I like to believe I have a lot more to say and a lot more things to point out about a newest release. So it's with great pleasure that I bring you our next episode of 200 Years or Well Designed, featuring Arcane's very own Ambessa Medarda. Unfortunately, outside of trying her out in practice tool, we were only allowed to playtest Ambessa on the new Piltover and Zon themed ARAM map, which is also a fairly significant update they're adding, and considering the nature of her gameplay, it would have probably been better to try her out on Summoner's Rift, where you can see how she performs in laning phase, mid-game, so on and so forth, instead of the interminable clusterfucks that take place on Howling Abyss. But I was still able to get a good handle on what to expect from her going forward. In line with her rather opportunistic ends justify the means attitude towards combat, politics, and war, Riot attempted to demonstrate that through her abilities, which may give off the impression that she is not above making use of underhanded tactics to get the upper hand. As a skirmisher, she is designed to output good DPS and excel in dueling scenarios, faring better in single combat and having the necessary means to orchestrate those scenarios in question. Remarkably, she's also the first energy champion to come out in over 10 years, with the last one being Zed if I recall correctly, though it's been confirmed by Ambessa's designer that her resource carries no narrative significance. In other words, before people start speculating that she has ties to Lee Sin, Akali, Shen, Kennen, no she doesn't, it's just called energy for the sake of it being gratuitous to call it something else. They wanted her to be a very scrappy champion with a high skill floor and ceiling, and I would have to attest to that. I can imagine it's going to be a couple months before players really start to understand the ins and outs of her. At first glance, I would surmise that her kit is very intuitive, which is good because it means it feels good to play her, and extremely satisfying when you execute her combos correctly. However, she's going to be challenging to get the hang of, easily one of the most mechanically demanding champions in the game. I say that because we already have someone in League who demonstrates that difficulty. Ambessa's passive is Drake Count Step. When casting an ability, her next basic attack will be empowered to gain slightly more range, deal bonus damage, and restore a bit of energy. Nothing we haven't seen before, it's basically a Spellblade with the obligatory resource mechanic that every energy champion has. However, there's another critical detail. After using an ability, Ambessa can input a movement command to then dash in that direction. Sound familiar? Because it's almost identical to Callista's martial poise to an extent, only instead of auto attacks, it's on abilities. Ambessa can dash forward, backwards, or side to side. If you ever played Aatrox before, it's not too dissimilar to his ability to use Umbral Dash while casting Darkened Blade. Everyone is well aware of the immense mechanical execution required to master Callista, and Ambessa will be no different. That she can input a free target dash after any ability cast on its own adds an unprecedented number of use cases, let alone the rest of her kit. Though you'll be happy to know that dashes from her passive can knock over walls. So while she's going to be obnoxiously mobile, I can at least give credit where it's due. They did think things through. That being said, the way her passive is designed paints a clear picture of how her abilities are intended to be used. Since energy is both a limitless resource and yet a low capacity one, Ambessa needs to make liberal use of her empowering auto attacks to sustain her uptime, much like how Lee Sin has to even auto attacks himself. This also implies Ambessa's mobility will be less effective at running away, given she won't have that much opportunity to auto attack. So while she's hypermobile, it's primarily in an offensive context, meaning her advantage state may very well be one of the best in the game, but a disadvantage state might not be. Her Q consists of two parts, Cunning Sweep and Sundering Slam. The first cast of her Q has a similar animation to Evelyn's ultimate, although the hitbox is more akin to a Darius Q, with the outer edge dealing full damage and anywhere else dealing half. If Ambessa manages to hit something, she can then recast Q to use the second one, a straight line attack with fairly decent range that deals full damage to the first target in line of fire, and half damage to everyone else beyond that. I should mention that both her Qs deal % health damage. Why am I not surprised? It's a very simple ability designed to serve as her main damaging tool. Now, in light of her Q1 having a very narrow sweet spot at the edge, and her Q2 being a very narrow skill shot in a straight line, maximizing her pressure on Ambessa taxes her knowledge of her passive and awareness of spacing. Done properly, Ambessa has a respectable neutral game for a melee. You can use Q1 and Q2, then buffer a dash back with each one to slowly chip away at your opponent, or you can buffer a dash forward to get in close proximity of your target for a burst trade, or all in. Whichever option you choose, you can't just face roll on the keyboard to make it work, especially since Ambessa is an energy champion where you need to be aware not to overuse your abilities in a short time frame. Her W is Repudiation, a shield followed by a slam on the ground around her, kind of like Skarner's W. If Ambessa is struck by a champion or monster between the shield and ground slam, she deals bonus damage. Very straightforward, but do be careful to remember her passive. Ambessa can dash in between the initial cast of her shield and the attack, which means from her Q and W combined we have 3 dashes now. Not the most offensive ability out there though. The shield scales off attack damage, so it's kind of like Riven's Valor in that sense, and if my memory serves, the scaling of the actual damage isn't that high even with the empowered attack. I will remind you though that numbers are always subject to change. Ambessa's E is Lacerate, an AoE attack that has her spin around her and deal damage to everyone, slowing them tremendously but decaying over the 1 second duration. Cast by itself it may not seem all that remarkable, but if you input a dash, Ambessa will swing around again. I think you can see where this is going. Unless you have someone who can dash in extreme distance or knock her back in extreme distance, it will literally be impossible to get away from Ambessa when she has 4 dashes across her basic abilities and a fairly sizable AoE slow that can proc twice. I can imagine she'll be a nightmare to deal with for any non-mobile champion, but there is something to make note of. Ambessa doesn't have that much front-loaded damage. Her Q, W, and E all have 2 parts to them and all deal damage, but the actual scaling of her attacks, or at least her W and E, aren't really that much. She may have a ton of sustained damage, but in contrast to other ability casters like Riven, Renekton, and Pantheon and so on, she doesn't have a hard burst rotation in light of not having an ACC in her kit. In essence, while she'll be a bitch and a half to run away from, I think the intent behind her design is that she gives you a fighting chance. She'll punish you if you try to run, but unlike most other skirmishers who can invalidate you like Fiora Riposte, Jack's Counter-Strike, Riven Chain CC, Tryndamere Ultimate, Ambessa wants to take you head on and expects you to do the same against her. No stealth, no targetability, nothing like that. Fighting her comes down entirely to mechanics, how well she can dodge your stuff and how well you can dodge hers. Unless of course you're playing a stat checker yourself, in which case yeah, you can just walk up to her and bonk her and there's not much she can do. Now, her ultimate. When I first saw her ultimate, I was initially floored by its description. Keep in mind I was already raising an eyebrow when I saw her passive Q, W, and E, but her ultimate almost made me press the 200 years alarm on sight, public execution. Let's actually talk about the active first. Aiming in a straight line if an enemy champion is still within the line of fire, Ambessa blinks behind the farthest enemy champion, locking them down for about a second. For all intents and purposes, it's a mixture between Yona's ult, K'Sante's ult, and Vi's ult. The Yona part is the projecting in a line before blinking, the Vi part is the locking down one enemy, and the K'Sante part is, I guess, the vibe of the ability. I say that because unlike Yona's ultimate, which captures every single person in range, Madame Medarda goes after the farthest one from the back, meaning if there's someone standing between her and the person you actually want to go after, she blinks right past them and targets that person, adding some interesting questions to the mix. You may have noticed that if there's no target in range, she won't move at all. You can't use this to escape under normal circumstances, which again makes sense. I don't think the matriarch of one of Noxus's most influential warmongering families would take too kindly to running away. But for clarity, unlike her passive dashes, this one can go over walls if her target's behind one, but I think this time it's reasonable. The implications of bypassing the enemy frontline and going straight for the back one is a very interesting one, as it makes trying to stop her not quite as straightforward as one would expect. It also gives Ambessa the means to target any wounded enemies attempting to hide behind their frontline and deliver the final blow. Very opportunistic of an ultimate, wouldn't you say? Personally, I'd rather have something with a more generous AoE like Yona or more guaranteed lockdown like Vi, but it's a very effective all-in tool all the same, if you can land it. While decently fast cast time, as you can see, it's quite a narrow line of fire, having no hard CC in her base kit to set this up other than maybe the slow on Lacerate. Once again, Ambessa affords her opponent the chance to respond instead of turbo CC chaining you the way Yona does. Is it necessary to make every video about Yona? Yes, it actually is. If it were just that alone, I would have been fine with Ambessa's ultimate, but then I saw she has a passive on it. Just by existing, she gains bonus % armor penetration. Okay, fair enough, no true damage and all physical attacks. It's not that inappropriate. But in addition, she also gains Omnivamp. Yeah, Ambessa has battle healing, essentially Lee Sin's Iron Will active permanently that scales with lifesteal. While they didn't reduce it against non-champions, it was quite concerning that a champion with technically limitless resource and a shield I might add has battle healing. Not a ridiculous amount mind you, but if I could pinpoint one aspect of her that I could see completely vanishing from her kit through nerfs, it would be the healing, or at least they'll make it so she doesn't heal at all against minions. I get it, most skirmishers have an element of sustain to supplement their penchant for long fights, but if you were to list out everything she has, insane combat mobility, AoE damage, a shield, a heavy AoE slow, a poke, trade and all-in rotation, a long-range isolating dash, and % armor penetration, giving her battle healing definitely comes off unnecessary. Even the armor penetration part. I know with absolute certainty that Riven mains are pissed off right now. They would kill to have some semblance of tank busting in their kit. If it weren't for me having the privilege of playing her first hand, I would have chalked up Ambessa to being another 200 years champ with a bunch of superfluous crap in her kit. But when I actually played her, again it may have just been due to us playing an ARAM where it's constant 5v5, so no laning phase or chance to split push, but Ambessa kinda comes off underwhelming. Or not underwhelming, but I can somewhat understand why they felt the need to give her free armor penetration and battle healing. Let's recap. Ambessa has a ton of dashes, but they're engineered in a way that only makes them sustainable when attacking, not retreating. Ambessa has readily available percent health damage on her Q, but missing the sweet spot on Q1 causes her to deal only half damage, and her Q2 also only deals half damage to enemies beyond the first. So hiding behind a minion, for example, makes her Q2 a lot weaker. She has an ultimate that is completely worthless if it misses, as in she doesn't even get to dash, and it's easy to dodge. Really, the only guaranteed aspects of her are W and E, which don't do that much damage based on the numbers they had when I played her. Furthermore, she has no hard crowd control in her base kit, and her time to kill is noticeably higher than even members of her class, who typically have someone to frontload a good portion of their pressure. She really wants to scrap in the most traditional way possible. I'm not even saying this because I'm shilling for Riot or something for inviting me. Outside of my silly 1v1 against Dumbs where I went full lifesteal and he went full crit, it never felt like the armor penetration and battle healing was conspicuous. I mean, maybe I was healing and not realizing it, but it's not like I was regenning back to full against minions or shredding tanks in half a second. Mind you, I only played her for a couple hours, but my point is, everything in her kit feels intentional. It's there for a reason, not just for the sake of being there. Her time to kill is very long, and more importantly, she doesn't have any way to stop enemy pressure. She can withstand enemy pressure with her shield, but she lacks on target ability, stealth, or even stuns to prevent her opponent from attacking. Expectedly, she'll sustain a lot of damage, so in her case, the free healing has a purpose to it. I think overall, in the short time I've played her, despite being a very mechanically taxing champion to play, she's surprisingly straightforward to play against. Bigger bodies, as in champions with more durability and resilience, might be able to overwhelm her through brute force, obligating her to go for a hit and run playstyle, slowly chipping away at them before finding the right opportunity to go in. And even then, none of Ambessa's mobility will save her against the likes of Renekton, Mordecai, Sir Garen, and whatnot who can stat check her into oblivion. I'm using top laners because their intent is to put her in top lane. Conversely, I can already anticipate how much ADC mains will despise her. She's practically a hybrid between Sylas and Riven. I wouldn't be surprised if players call for her head, but I actually believe that for how obnoxious Ambessa might be to take on with all those dashes and whatnot, she doesn't appear to give off that same what the f impression as Yana, Cassante, Gwen, or those other champs who feel like they can run you down while you can't do anything about it. Also, to reiterate, it's still first impressions, they're not meant to be final conclusions. All in all, I'm just happy to see an Arcane character included in League of Legends that wasn't already there beforehand, and to be honest, I think Ambessa was the perfect choice. Some people wanted to see Silco, but I think they already sort of did, just in the form of Renata. We haven't seen Mel actively fight, so she wouldn't work either, but Ambessa, though only having appeared for a short time in Season 1, definitely looks like she's been through a lot. Couldn't have picked a better character to add to the game. I hope you guys are looking forward to Arcane Season 2 as much as I am, but for now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other First Impressions episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.